institution. FSU license plates support scholarships for deserving students who enrich and contribute to our state and nation. Gifts for first-time buyers are online at fsu.edu/mytag.
The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Raising homes is a solution to rising seas. And crime, corruption, and a deadly shootout from Jacksonville's Prohibition past. We talked to historian and author Tim Gilmore about one of the First Coast's most notorious crime families. And break out the king cake, it's time for Sparty Gras, Springfield's answer to the New Orleans holiday. You can join the conversation on air by giving us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. It's all ahead this
Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. There's growing confusion over whether federal employees are required to respond to a government-wide email sent last Saturday asking them to list 5 accomplishments from the past week. The Office of Personnel Management issued new guidance last night ahead of the midnight deadline. NPR's Kristen Wright reports.
The memo from the acting director of OPM says agencies should review responses and evaluate non-responses. The guidance also says agencies should decide whether to take action against employees who don't answer. But earlier Monday, a government memo obtained by NPR indicated OPM said something different. It was telling agencies that responses were voluntary. Adding to the confusion, over the weekend, the Departments of State, Defense, and Energy told workers not to respond to the "What did you do last week?" email. And some agencies gave conflicting guidance. Doge leader Elon Musk posted on his X platform last night, workers have another chance to give their list or will be fired. Kristen Wright, NPR News, Washington.
The House meets this morning and is scheduled to take up a budget bill favored by President Trump. That's because it includes spending on all his priorities in a single bill. Last week, the Senate passed a different version of a budget measure, but it splits Trump's priorities into more than one bill. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth will be visiting the U.S. Naval Base at Guantanamo Bay today. It marks his first trip there since joining the Trump administration. NPR's Sasha Pfeiffer has more.
The Pentagon says while at Guantanamo, Hegseth will be briefed on operations at the base, including at the detention facility and prison complex, where the administration has been holding migrants deported from the United States. The Defense Department says Hegseth will also meet with service members at the base and aboard the USS Thomas Hudner naval destroyer. Back in 2004, Hegseth served at Guantanamo for about a year when he was a member of the Minnesota Army National Guard. Now he'll be the second senior Trump administration official to visit Guantanamo this month. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem traveled there a few weeks ago. Sasha Pfeiffer, NPR News.
The Vatican says Pope Francis remains in critical condition in a Rome hospital, but that he spent a restful night. NPR's Fatima Al-Kassab has more from Rome.
In a one-sentence statement, the Vatican said Pope Francis had rested well the whole night. The 88-year-old has been in hospital battling double pneumonia. This week, thousands gathered in the rain to pray for the Pope's health in St. Peter's Square, setting off what the Vatican announced will be a nightly marathon of prayers for his recovery. According to the Vatican, the pontiff showed a slight improvement in the last day and was able to resume some work, including calling the parish priest in Gaza, who he has kept in touch with since the start of the war in Gaza in October 2023. Fatima Al-Kassab, NPR News, Rome.
You're listening to NPR News.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning, I'm Stephen Ponson. It's now 9:04. You can now play the new Monopoly Jacksonville edition and immerse yourself in several cultural and historic landmarks in the River City. The new version of the 90-year-old board game was unveiled yesterday. With a roll of the dice, a player could land on landmarks like Friendship Fountain and the Main Street Bridge as part of 22 local sites picked for the game. Chief of Staff for the game maker, Top Trumps USA, Kate Hollick, says that will keep the society in the game.
This is really significant for the history of Jacksonville. Our mission, of course, is to educate the public about their history so that they can not make the same mistakes that we've made in the past, but also to learn something about what people have taught us and shared with us through oral histories. It's really important that we're on this board.
Jacksonville was selected as one of a growing number of community versions of the game after the game maker said it was looking for sweet spots in the U.S. The game costs $39.99. Drivers can expect some overnight detours through this Friday on San Marco Boulevard at Hendricks Avenue as part of intersection improvements. The Florida Department of Transportation says those detours are scheduled from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. the next morning. They'll affect southbound San Marco at Hendricks and northbound Hendricks at San Marco. Eventually, the rain will move out of northeast Florida and we'll have sunny skies later on this afternoon. Highs will reach the lower 70s and we'll also have breezy conditions along the coastline today.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Lilly Endowment, a private foundation supporting NPR's coverage of religion and spirituality, and Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and welcome to First Coast Connect. Today, as homeowners scramble to stay above floodwaters, we ask two people deeply involved in St. Augustine's resiliency efforts about the cost, benefits, and long-term viability of hiking homes above rising seas. Later in the program, we dig into the history of a notorious gangster, a corrupt mob family, and a fatal shootout on the Acosta Bridge with the author of the JaxPsychoGeo blog. But first, lifting homes has become a booming business in coastal Florida. Homeowners responding to rising seas by raising their homes. Here to discuss it is Jessica Beach, Chief Resilience Officer and Deputy Director of Public Works and Utilities for the City of St. Augustine. Good morning, Jessica.
Good morning. How are you, Ann?
Very well. Thanks for being here. We're also joined by Buddy Schauland, Building Official and Code Enforcement Manager for the City of St. Augustine. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Jessica, it's possible now to drive around St. Augustine and sort of see the visual manifestation of climate change in a couple of ways. The city's doing a lot of efforts. There's a lot of construction projects that you'll see, but one of the most striking is this home lifting. They're lifted off their elevation, and it is something that we're seeing just a lot more of than even just a few years ago. Can you just kind of describe this situation in St. Augustine, how much of that you're seeing, what it aims to accomplish?
Sure. So I would say Hurricane Matthew in 2016 really hit the city of St. Augustine hard. And I know Buddy at the time, he was our, still is our building official, and he can definitely speak to what he has seen firsthand with our homes being totally impacted, businesses, just the quality of life. It's been pretty devastating for the community. And so I think that wake-up call from Hurricane Matthew really kind of set in motion a number of initiatives that the city's been undertaking. But not only that, just our community. I think just seeing the resilience of our community has been inspiring. And a lot of the folks have, out of their own fruition, this is not any state program or city program or federal program. They've been doing it kind of outside of that in a lot of ways. And so I think you've seen the city transform a lot of houses that maybe have been repetitively flooded. Some have lifted, some have been demolished, and then someone will come in and buy that and build like new construction. So you'll see it kind of throughout the city. It's like checkered. And what makes our city a little bit unique is we have a lot of historic properties. And so that's brought another set of challenges. And we actually have flooding guidance for properties that are historic, and it can really apply to any type of property in general. But there are, tricks of the trade, so to speak, to help those historic properties kind of blend in, because that does become, when you're looking at the landscape or the streetscape, it does change how houses look on some of our historic streets.
Sure. And I know that we've got some photos of these buildings around St. Augustine that people who are watching our live stream will be able to look at that show it can, Buddy, be a little peculiar. Sometimes it's subtle and it's just a couple feet that these homes are being lifted. But sometimes it's really quite dramatic, especially when you're taking a slab home and lifting it 10 or more feet.
Yeah, the majority of the homes that are being lifted for us, though, they're on piers. So it's easier to lift them, but a lot of them are lifting them up and they're wanting to have storage or vehicle parking underneath it. So they're lifting them up even higher because of that.
Yeah. And it's not a project for the faint of heart. I mean, describe how it's done if it is a slab home, because there's so many of those. I'm thinking particularly in the Davis Shores neighborhood, and you're seeing even those homes being, with hydraulic jacks, I guess, lifted up.
Well, we haven't had any within the city that were on slab being elevated. A lot of those are what they've done, and these are all out of their own pocket. They are abandoning the first floor and they're building up from there. A lot of them, they'll take off the roof and then they'll start building up and then fill in up to the height that they want to put a slab in there. And so they're still using the existing structure, but just building it up higher.
I'm curious about that. I'm going to ask my director if he can find a particular photo of a blue house. I think it's got some yellow chairs, and it may take him a minute to pull it up. But when he does, I want to ask about it because I'm fairly certain that was a raised slab. I mean, perhaps the slab is intact on the bottom, and they've raised it and built a new floor. But
they've done. Actually, our director, she lives over in Volano, on Volano Beach, and a neighbor of hers, they lifted a slab. They dig underneath it and they put the beams underneath there and then they start jacking it up. And so you have the whole slab and the whole house.
This house up there? Do you think
that's in
was
South Davis Shores, that particular house?
I mean, I seem to recall when that was in the works of being lifted.
Yeah, and you'll see it throughout the neighborhood too. A lot of the houses have been doing it. It's been so the story on that too is we had mentioned Hurricane Matthew 2016, a lot of flooding. We had Hurricane Irma 11 months later, 2017. So you've got houses that were just getting put back together. They weren't even talking about lifting, just getting it back to the way it was, and then another hurricane comes and floods it. That's really, I think, a trigger where some people were trying to look for other alternatives to try to save their homes. And so that lifting really became evident. And then I think also, I think it was in 2020, we had kind of this compound flood event. It wasn't a hurricane, but it was a nor'easter during king tide season. And we literally had citywide flooding, almost like a Hurricane Dorian type level.
Mm-hmm.
But this wasn't on anyone's radar. It just kind of came out of nowhere. All these conditions kind of combined. And so I remember Buddy and I were at a neighborhood meeting and we had our city manager, a lot of city staff, and our residents came out. They were like, we need something. There is a program that's actually where we launched a formal kind of participation in the flood mitigation assistance program where FEMA has the ability to come in and cost share with property owners to lift. There's a lot of rules and things that you have to do to follow the FEMA requirements, but that's really what triggered it. So actually Buddy piloted that project with 2 properties that we knew wanted to do something. And so we put in, I say we, Buddy, put in the hard work of those applications to submit to FEMA to kind of pilot it. It's pretty involved. So we ended up a year later in 2021, we had a consulting team come on board to help the city with it. So we've been participating in FEMA's flood mitigation assistance program since 2021, where we're taking applications through our community, putting them together, submitting to FEMA, and we're trying to get those through that process so eventually they can cost share with the federal government to be able to lift on that too. And we've talked with contractors. There's some local contractors that do it. It's kind of a niche industry and it's very specialized, and it's but it's throughout the entire state. You're seeing more of that need as people want to stay in their homes, they want to stay in their community, and this is one way to do that.
And how receptive is FEMA, Buddy, to these kinds of applications versus other FEMA resilience programs where they offer some sort of reimbursement? Is home raising something that they're very enthusiastic about generally?
Yeah, it's the flood mitigation assistance grant. They've been having it around for years now, and it's an annual one. And they're promoting elevating or demolish and rebuild, or even where the jurisdiction acquires the property as an acquisition. Then you can make it into a park. You can never build anything on it again. They've been very receptive with it. They've been pushing it a lot. And then a few years ago, when we had that big infrastructure bill that President Biden signed, it dumped a bunch of money into the program so that more people can have more stuff done, more dealing with their houses.
Right. And what kind of demand have you seen from your community when it comes to these FEMA applications?
We started the first year, like Jessica was saying, I had 2 property owners approach me about it. I'd been talking about it since Hurricane Matthew in 2016, but it's a time-consuming process. And earlier you did have the picture of the one that we have from the 2020 cycle that is being built. But that year we had 2 property owners. I went through the process, and FDEM, Florida Department of Emergency Management, they were very helpful because I didn't know how to do any of this stuff, and they helped me through it. They only recommended one of the 2. And it comes down to a benefit cost analysis and whether it's profitable for FEMA to fund this. They look at, I think it's 30 years worth of possible flooding and what they would have to pay out. Is it worth it for them to do it? The one they didn't, the state said, yeah, FEMA's not going to ever do that one. But then the other one, they said they would do it. And that was a demolition and reconstruction of a new structure. And I'll say that we started that process in 2020, and the house isn't done yet. It's almost done.
Wow. So it's a marathon. Yeah. The program is a marathon. And you had mentioned like the interest. So we piloted it in 2020. 2021, we had, I think, about 20 plus properties that went in and submitted. There wasn't enough funding in the program at the time, so we did not get those properties funded. But as Buddy had alluded to, they did pump more money into that program. So in 2022, we applied again, and we had actually, in 2022, we also had Hurricanes Ian and Nicole hit. So we had initially the 20 properties that were carried forward from the 2021 cycle, and then we had over 80 properties come to us after that hurricane because we were literally in the middle of the cycle, the application cycle for that. So there was a huge demand. And at the end of the day, we have 60 properties that have made it through, and we're pretty close towards the end of actually getting contracts awarded from FEMA. At least we're hopeful. We're kind of see what happens with that too. But we have 60 properties in the queue. In 2023, we had, I think, it's about 10 properties that made it through. And now in 2024, we just turned stuff into the state. So we're going to see how many properties with that. So it's been a very program of interest, but it's a commitment. It takes time, and it's cost shared. So the homeowner, in a lot of cases, is having to come up with their 25% of the cost it's going to take it to lift, and FEMA will cover 75%. And there is a tiered cost sharing ability with FEMA. So they want to target the severe repetitive loss properties first. Those are like the most severely damaged that they want to lift first. Those get higher priority typically.
The ones that have flooded repeatedly.
Yes, and there's a whole formula. Buddy knows that much better than I do, but there's a formula to how they calculate that. So there is a cost sharing percentage and prioritization through that program. So it's, a lot of people can apply for it, but it really depends on, there's other factors that go into that.
I want to talk more about cost, but first, if you're just joining us, we are talking about resilience efforts in St. Augustine, some of which include raising existing properties. If you have a question or a comment, please give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. So let's talk cost. There was a recent story, relatively recent, in the New York Times talking about some homes that were being lifted in Florida, also homes that were being lifted in Texas following Hurricane Harvey and all the damage that wrought. And their costs were roughly in the area of about $75 to $200 a square foot to lift. They were saying a typical Florida home on a slab could cost as much as $400,000 to raise, but larger houses could easily exceed $1 million. So how does FEMA calculate the cost benefit analysis? It is based just on the cost of repairing should it flood?
It's complicated. That's why we have a consulting firm help us with that, to navigate that process with it. I do remember kind of on average. So again, keeping in mind, if like using the fiscal year 2022 as an example, we had 60 properties. I think we did like a quick average. It was around $200,000 on average per property to lift. But keep in mind, you have some that were maybe $75,000. You had some that could be $400,000 to $600,000. Like it ranges, and a lot of it depends on the structure. And Buddy's more familiar with that side of it too. But that kind of gives at least a number in people's minds to be able to understand, like, what does it cost to do this? But we have seen those costs going up every year. So that was from a few years ago.
Sure.
So it's expensive in some ways, but if you can cost share with that, I think that's the incentive why folks are interested in this federal program, to be able to make that more attainable.
The article that I was talking about, Buddy, they said, it can be hard for some homeowners to wrap their heads around it. They had one couple in, I think it was in St. Petersburg, that initially bought their home for $265,000. And when they looked at raising it, it was going to cost $375,000, and they initially resisted because they said it's just not worth it, and then their home flooded twice, and so now they're doing it.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest problems is you got to factor in how much it's going to cost to do all this, and how much is your mortgage? How much did you just buy the house? Are you upside down on it still because of all that? And then you want to put more money into it. And if you're looking at, I want to do a demolition and reconstruction of something, you're demolishing something, your house that, I'm pretty sure the bank probably is not going to be happy about you doing that, but you got to get more money to be able to do all of this. So they have to weigh it. And we saw a lot of people that didn't want to do it because of the cost. But after they keep getting flooded every year because of hurricanes, a lot of them are just being driven to have to do something or try to sell the property and hopefully get something out of it.
What about the character of the neighborhood? I mean, we're talking about Davis Shores in some of these pictures that we've been looking at, and those homes are, some of them are historic. The neighborhood itself certainly is a historic plat, but it's not kind of what people think about as colonial St. Augustine historic. There are homes in that area, though, that have also been raised along the bayfront that are historic homes. So what does it do to the fabric of a neighborhood when people start raising the homes up?
That's one of the things that the Historic Architectural Review Board, if you want to raise your house, you have to go to them to get permission because it's a partial demolition of the structure. And they'll generally let you do it. But they struggled at the beginning when people started wanting to elevate it because it changes the streetscape of all these buildings have always been this high. And now you're starting to elevate some of them. And I remember one that they were raising it, and there's the house next door. When they came, this house had already been raised, and they were still working on it. That next house, they wanted to go way higher, and they went to the board, and the board struggled with that because they know FEMA wants you to get higher. They want them to get higher, but it would look really bad it wouldn't look proportionally correct. And so they allowed them to go just as high as what the other one did. If they went up 4 feet, then they could go up 4 feet. So it is a struggle when you're talking about the actual historic districts and trying to get these properties elevated.
Yeah.
We had a resilient heritage study that came out in 2021 that looked at the economics of flooding and how it impacts our historic city. And out of that also stemmed that flooding guidance for historic properties. And there's a lot of resources in there. And it's how do you kind of make the view shed more integrated with the adjacent properties. And so there's ways that you can do that. And there's examples in the guidebook too that show how you can get creative with the latticing and kind of hiding some of where the lifting is. And you'll see that along the bayfront examples of that. And that's part of a walking tour that we do too, just to show like this is happening. And to Buddy's point too, our Historic Architectural Review Board kind of struggles with that because it does change the streetscape quite a bit. But it's almost a domino effect because as these properties are starting to lift, they're trying to become more resilient and protect those historic properties. But then there's cases where buildings cannot be lifted because of various structural reasons. Then they have to look at floodproofing those buildings. And so that, again, they're going to be sitting at that elevation that they're at now. They can't lift. So it does kind of change the way things look for the historic city.
Yeah. And certainly some homes, I mean, the kind of traditional Florida cinder block home, when it's lifted up, 10, 15 feet, it has a peculiar look. I mean, it's got this staircase that's desperately trying to reach the front door, and it looks kind of out of the aspect ratio that you prefer, I guess, of just a house, how it looks.
And you'll see that kind of transitioning in South Davis Shores. I know some of the photos that we're kind of running through as examples of that too, is you're seeing more of it through the neighborhood because these houses, they were built like in the 1950s, I think. And so this was before flood insurance rate maps were created and before we really understood and knew what a floodplain was. And so it's definitely kind of it's transforming the neighborhood.
Sure. I mean, places like Davis Shores too, I guess they're almost created out of marsh, right? They were just filled essentially marshlands that it's really not that surprising that there is this particular peril. But I wanted to ask you, because I know that there's you can raise a home, but you are also over public works and utilities. And there are a lot of things that cannot be raised or are not being raised when it comes to, obviously streets can be underwater, sewer systems can be underwater. And so if your home is high and dry, it doesn't matter if you can't get to it or if you can't use the facilities.
That is part of the trade-off. And so the home raising is one tool in the toolbox to try to help protect those assets from like a homeowner's perspective. On the city side of it, when we're looking at critical infrastructure, we went through and just completed a vulnerability assessment looking at where should we be prioritizing our critical assets. And so for a homeowner, and we've talked about this with our community, in some cases, roads may not be able to be raised. It's a very costly process. And, we'd have to look at that kind of comprehensively to see, does it make sense to do that? So there is that trade-off of, kind of living with the floods, even though your asset, your property is maybe out of that harm's way when it comes to floodwaters, but there could be other services impacted. And I will say the city has been targeting like our sewer system because we were significantly impacted under Hurricane Matthew, and we had damages to our lift stations, which moves the sewer water from your home to the wastewater treatment plant. And so when those get knocked out, you're not able to flush your toilets, that's not good. So we just recently wrapped up a project hardening and elevating and floodproofing those critical infrastructure that can help those toilets keep flushing and get to the wastewater treatment plant. So the city is taking measures where it can to do that. But to your point, it's trade-offs with, there's things that can be done, but it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, and there are also some properties, Buddy, you'd mentioned you can, in some cases, FEMA will support the city acquiring the land if it's a willing seller and just saying we're never going to build on it again. And you have done that in St. Augustine. Some properties, I know there's a park kind of in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, we that wasn't done through FEMA. It was
Okay.
the city commission we ended up buying it, and they moved the house and moved over down towards Palm Coast, and then we turned it into a park. We brought in fill and put it into a park to try to buffer the water coming in.
Yeah. The question of fill is also something that is on your radar right now. I know that there's been a lot of discussion in the city about people who are trying to harden their property by bringing in additional fill. Can you describe, first of all, what they're trying to accomplish and why that sometimes is a problem?
I was like, who takes this one?
Yeah. So when you build a new house, you're required to be at a certain height. You got to be 1 foot above what the base flood elevation is. And everybody wants to get as high as they can get. You do have zoning ordinances that says your roof can only be so high. And that goes off of that 1 foot freeboard, the 1 foot above the base flood elevation is where it starts measuring from. But people are trying to get as high as they can. And a lot of people want to have a slab on grade house and they want to have that fill brought in there. And so people have been bringing in a lot of fill. It hasn't been that big of an issue up until more recently, probably last year and a half ago, where people are bringing in a lot of fill. And what it's doing is it's causing problems with the neighbors. The one where it became a real big issue where the planning and zoning board is starting to kind of freak out about it and stuff. But they built walls on the side, and then they brought in all this fill. And the finished floor for the house that's going to go there is going to be at the roof line of the neighbor's house.
Where is that located?
It's in South Davis Shores, off of just down from Coquina Park on Coquina Avenue.
Okay.
Yeah,
And so
the house that's right next to the Coquina Park is in between these two. They flood for everything. Every time there's any water that comes into South Davis Shores, they're flooding. So they're afraid that this is going to cause more flooding for them.
because it's a kind of a runoff situation, or it's just not equity in terms of where the water goes?
I think it's a combination. So the city actually had a task force put together. I think it was in 2021 when we kicked that off, and it was starting to address that fill issue because it was particularly in South Davis Shores where you're seeing the houses going up. And to Buddy was describing one of those scenarios where one house is coming in to bring in fill and one hasn't done that yet. And so it's perception is part of that, just looking physically at a much higher building. And also the task force was trying to tackle that. So they did a couple of things out of it. They capped what we call impervious area. So you can't just pave over your entire lot. They're trying to leave some of that for percolation for rainwater to go in. But also we have a lot grading requirement now. And this is particularly for single family lots to help manage that rainwater. So there are different types of flooding. And I think that's where people struggle. You've got the coastal tides and that aspect coming in flooding, but then you have when it just rains. And so this is mainly trying to manage rainwater that's hitting that property so it's not just flooding out their neighbors. And so there's ways to do that. We have some guidance out there, and it's best practices where they can try to retain their rainwater and not flood their neighbors out. So it's like more of an intentional thing that they can do with that. So it's been a challenge.
Yeah. Is there a sense that the city will be evaluating the value of rebuilding? Does the city have in its pocket when it comes to trying to encourage a homeowner that has repeatedly flooded, perhaps try to persuade them to move?
I think it's been kind of more on the property owners, like, it's just kind of happened as they and, Buddy had mentioned earlier too, everyone's in a different circumstance and situations. You have some younger families coming to the neighborhood that would like to stay long term, but then we also have others that are, retired or on fixed income, they have nowhere else to go. And so you have kind of across the board different situations on it. So as the city, we're basically trying to connect people to resources and what their options are and let them kind of make that decision for themselves. I would say most of the homeowners that we've met with, we do a lot of one-on-one site visits because a lot of questions that we get on flooding and flood mitigation. We'll meet with homeowners on their property and kind of give them some ideas. There's checklists and tools and resources that we can connect them with to kind of empower them to be able to do what they can on their property. And as we meet with individuals and talk with them, most people, they love the neighborhood, they love the city, they want to stay. And so they're doing whatever they can possible to make that happen. And so there has been cases where people, they don't want to deal with the flooding. It can be very stressful, and they sell and they'll move out. But then you still have some that are, this is where they want to stay. So we've seen kind of across the board with that.
What are some of the things that you can advise people if you're visiting their property and they're not in a position or, financially able to raise their house, that they can do that might alleviate some of those floodwaters?
We talked to them about trying to flood-proof the house as best they can. FEMA doesn't recognize it, so you can't get any discounts on your insurance if you flood-proof.
What does it mean to flood-proof your home?
You're putting in door dams that will try to block the water from coming in. You're putting paint or something, a special type of paint or a special type of barrier on the outside up so far that it won't let the water penetrate into the house. Just doing things like that to try to keep the water from entering your house. FEMA doesn't recognize that for residential properties, but if you can't afford to elevate or demolish and tear and build a new house, these are some of the things that we're trying to tell them to do to try to help with that. Also, if they can figure out ways to, in their landscaping, to try to keep the water from coming in. We have had some people down on St. George Street that have 3 houses that got together, and they put a wall around all 3 houses, and then they put these door dams in the openings whenever there's a hurricane coming or we know about any flooding. They put them in there, and so far they've protected those houses from any water getting in there.
I've been kind of collecting those examples as we meet with homeowners, and it's amazing to see the resilience, I think, of our community. They are doing whatever they can to try to flood-proof it. So the landscaping is one option where they can look at ways to try to keep the water from just kind of rushing into their house. We've seen homeowners come in and just the first thing is just elevating electrical features like the mechanical equipment that they don't want to get flooded, so their AC
Putting your
units
air
and things like
conditioning
that.
up, yeah.
Exactly. Get those up high. The door dams that Buddy had mentioned, those have been really popular. I remember this past hurricane season when we were getting ready for, I think it was Hurricane Milton, everyone had those out. And so we're seeing more of these products come online for both the businesses, but particularly with the residents. And so it's almost like a process where, they flood, they put it back together as it was, they flood again. They're like, I'm going to get a little bit smarter this time and try to flood proof it. And then at some point, that decision about lifting is kind of where they land to decide if they want to make that investment. The walls have been much more popular lately. We've been seeing more people coming in for walls to protect the property. It's essentially what they call like a ring wall system where they come in and they're basically building a mini wall around their property, and they have to have pump systems on the backside in case the water gets over the wall. They have to have a way for the water to get out. So there's different levels of sophistication and costs associated with those too. But we've been seeing our community kind of get very creative with this.
What about building back with materials? I mean, I think of things like laminate flooring, which I have in my house, and drywall, which are affordable but aren't very flood resistant. Do you advise people if they've flooded or if they're just remodeling their home about kind of materials to consider that are a little bit better at resisting or recovering from flood?
Yeah, we talked to them about using tile on the floor rather than carpet or wood, and using putting tile up the wall, or using it's not drywall but cement board down it from 4 feet down. Use cement board to try to keep all the water out.
Interesting.
Some houses we have one resident that they put concrete flooring down, so it's an easy cleanup. So if there are floodwaters, it's basically allows to come in and then they can make a quick cleanup of it. And it's basically just flood proofing from that 4-foot elevation down with the materials that make it more resistant. And it makes essentially you're allowing the water to come in and out, and then you just clean up after that.
I want to ask you a little bit about changing neighborhoods. Lincolnville is one in particular, which is a historic Black neighborhood south of St. Augustine. There was a time I recall there was a home in that neighborhood that actually was elevated on pallets, and it was an old home. It was not in great shape, and the stability of it was maybe questionable. It's no longer there. It's been replaced by one of those new, very common kind of high-rise looking buildings throughout Lincolnville. What is the city doing to prevent kind of climate gentrification in that area?
So I think that neighborhood's already kind of gone through that gentrification process even before, when we're really like the flooding has become more like an issue in your face type of thing. And so I think that neighborhood's kind of already gone through that process to some extent, but there's still some of that fabric that's integrated that wants to stay in the neighborhood that's been there historically. And some I think are participating in the FMA program to be able to cost share on that. We also have the Lincolnville Community Redevelopment Agency. And so that is specific for the Lincolnville neighborhood. And so there's funds that are generated that can go back for fix-it-up programs and rehabilitation to try to help residents where they may need some financial assistance with that. And that can include floodproofing of their houses. So that's been something that's been more recent that we've looked into.
So just big picture, how would you say the raising of buildings fits into the overall city plan when it comes to anticipating and living with rising seas?
It's definitely a tool in the toolbox. And I think we're looking comprehensively. We have a parallel study running with the Army Corps of Engineers that's looking at all 17 neighborhoods, everything within the city limits. What alternatives and strategies do we have available to us? And non-structural is a category in that, which includes the floodproofing and the lifting of buildings. So it's definitely a tool in the toolbox, and it's already happening. And so I think we're trying to connect residents with programs such as the FMA program and other programs that are starting to come online to help with that choice, that option. There's going to be some cases where it's not an option. And so we're looking at what they call structural or nature-based solutions for that. But we are looking at it comprehensively. So I foresee it continuing because it's definitely people want to stay in their homes.
Are you anticipating some loss of funding with the new administration's priorities? I know that, some of the Biden projects have been stopped or being reconsidered. Do you think that the FEMA money that's been available to do some of these partner cost sharings is going to dry up?
It's hard to say at this point. I don't think we've gotten a clear answer on that. I think we're all like watching and waiting to see what happens. We haven't had any directives that I'm aware of that says like this project is paused. Like we're basically moving forward as if it's going to happen. We're pretty far along in some of these programs that have started several years ago. And so those fundings have been allocated in prior years. And so we're hopeful that will continue. But I think potentially the new application cycles coming online and then kind of moving forward, the future programs, that is a little bit uncertain.
Yeah. Well, it is definitely something that we'll keep watching. And we sure appreciate you coming up from St. Augustine to talk about it. Jessica Beach, Buddy Schauland, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right. And up next, crime, corruption, and a deadly shootout from Jacksonville's Prohibition. Well, Jacksonville is full of larger-than-life characters, but few stories are as dramatic as the 1928 shootout on what was then the St. Johns River Bridge, now known as the Acosta Bridge. Here to talk about it, I'm joined by author, educator, and creator of the JaxPsychoGeo blog, Tim Gilmore. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Ann. Good to be here.
Welcome back, I should say. It's nice to see you.
Yeah.
So this shootout happened, as I said, in 1928 in September, and it was really one of the most notorious crimes of the period. Who all was involved in this?
This is absolutely sensational, this thing that happened in the middle of the city, in the middle of what was then the only bridge over the river other than the railroad bridge next to it. And 2:15 in the afternoon. It was Johnny Heisler. The Heisler family was infamous. We can talk about that a little bit in a minute, maybe. But Johnny Heisler was known as Duval's Liquor Czar or Whiskey King, all sorts of appellations like that. There's a Prohibition agent named Hope King, name to live up to, who stopped them on the bridge, and there was a toll. You had to stop and pay a toll ticket on the bridge, this shootout ensued. Heisler was carrying liquor from a place that was then called Mineral City, which is now Ponte Vedra. And it's hard to say who shot first, but the Prohibition agent, who was just 26 years old, by the way, shot Heisler 5 times, shot him once in the shoulder, twice in the chest, and twice in the back of the neck. And both men survived for a little while, but Heisler actually died that evening, and Hope ended up recovering.
It literally was like a scene from The Godfather, right? It's at the
Yeah,
toll booth.
right.
There's this shootout, this
Yeah,
fatal,
that's right.
and nobody else was hurt?
No. So there were, as far as how cinematic it seems to have been, there were differing accounts in the newspapers, and of course, then there were multiple newspapers, and there were evening editions and morning editions, right? So the next morning's edition had Hope King's account of what happened, and also had the account of the toll ticket.
We actually have a
person.
picture of the Jacksonville Journal from that day. That's from your blog.
That's right. So banner headline across the top. And the descriptions of Hope King, he's being shot at. He was shot twice, and he's just kind of walking through this rain of bullets as Heisler drives away while he's shooting. It's the way the ticket taker described it was cinematically heroic,
Of this agent, this prohibition agent.
Right.
So let's talk the Heislers, because you say that they really were one of the most notorious crime families in Northeast Florida at the time. Johnny Heisler was this guy, the Whiskey King, but who in his family, what kind of family did he run with?
Oh man. So everybody knew who the Heislers were. Everybody had some fear of the Heislers. They were responsible for at least a dozen murders from the 1890s through the 1930s. They had people on both sides of the law. They were bootleggers. They were moonshiners, right? They also, however, had, for example, Tom Heisler Sr. was a sheriff's deputy. And so he posed for, pictures of him with moonshine stills that he had collected. So basically what he's doing is taking out the family's competition while wearing the badge. Tom Heisler Jr. Shot someone and killed someone when he was 15 years old because they refused him a drink. Clyde Heisler was probably, I guess you could say, the tail end of the Heisler era. He was 20 years old when he shot and killed a married couple in a holdup in 1936, and he went to the electric chair in the early 40s. They were, but they also were mixed in with people who ran the city. Johnny Heisler's funeral after this shootout had about 1,500 people show up. Pallbearers, this is from the Jacksonville Journal at the time, pallbearers included prominent attorneys, police officers. There were police officers who were pallbearers at Johnny Heisler's funeral. So everybody knew who they were. They were, they had their own kind of reign of terror, but they also had their fingers in everything that was going on in the city.
And so what is their legacy in the city? I had not heard the Heisler name. Is it the kind of thing that is still, are their descendants still around?
There are, yes. I recently just briefly started talking with a descendant who is a retired police officer. So I haven't talked that much with him, but I look forward to talking more with him soon, and finding out what it was like to grow up, hearing and knowing some of these stories about your family. But this was a long time ago, right? But they are still known. I mean, people do occasionally tell these stories, and this shootout story is one of the most dramatic crime stories in the city's history.
So you in your blog always bring us through these rabbit holes and link to other stories and such. And there's a lot of, cross connection between some of them historically. How did you learn about this, though, in the first place?
I think for years people have been, when I talk to friends who are interested in history, or a good friend who's an archivist here, they'll bring up this particular story, because it's that sensationalist. I don't know when I first learned about the Heislers. Actually, they're if you do much digging in this time period, it's hard not to run into them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what was Prohibition like here
Mm.
in Northeast Florida? I mean, how big of a deal was it to be a bootlegger
Yeah.
like the Heisler family?
It was a really big deal. Yeah. So, in 1908, someone named Carrie Nation, fascinating figure, came to Jacksonville. She went around. She traveled the country. She wore all black. She wore a black veil. Everywhere she went, she carried a Bible and a hatchet.
I
Right?
think we have a picture of her up on our screen right now.
Carrie Nation, even her name, she came to Jacksonville in 1908, and she was a temperance was the name of the movement to try to and get to a point of prohibition. She was a temperance crusader. She visited some of what were called euphemistically female boarding houses in La Villa. These were brothels. And she said that Jacksonville was not a democracy, it was a demonocracy. That's what she called it.
Wow.
1910, there was a statewide measure that Floridians voted against for prohibition in the state. But 1918, Jacksonville City Council went ahead and decided we're going to make the city dry. So Jacksonville went dry before national prohibition went into effect 2 years later. And when you think of prohibition, you probably think of the mob bosses of the time, right? I mean, it was prohibition was very good for particular kinds of illegal trade, and it was very good for the Heislers in that way.
And I'm just curious, Carrie Nation, what was the hatchet about? Do you know? A Bible and a hatchet?
Yeah, well, I think largely it was symbolic, but sometimes I think she actually used the hatchet on doors of taverns and sinful places that she visited throughout the country.
She does sound of interest, and given that you've written now how many books about Jacksonville history?
24.
24.
Yeah.
Do you think that Carrie Nation might be on the list of
Well,
your...
she was a national figure. I think there are probably a couple of books about her already, but she is the kind of person I would want to write more about. That's true.
Sounds right up your alley.
Right.
So John Heisler's grave now is in a local cemetery,
Right.
adjacent to Riverside Memorial Park, kind of
Yeah.
off Normandy.
Yeah, it's kind of strange because it is a cemetery inside a cemetery. It's this older cemetery that, depending on the spelling, sometimes looks like Gravelly Hill and sometimes looks like Gravely Hill. But
Yeah.
the Heislers, there are some Heislers in there, and there's some other Heislers buried further out of town. But his grave is right there.
And if you want to visit it, you can also stop by. I guess there's a few Leonard Skinnard
Oh, true,
graves out
right?
that way too.
Yeah, they're in that. Honestly, I have not visited them, but I know that they're out there in that general vicinity. That's true.
I think that the inspiration for the band's name, Leonard Skinner, is actually buried out there too. So there's this great
Sure,
Skinnard synergy.
Make a whole day of the cemetery visit.
Right. Well, you can find a link to this story on our website. Tim Gilmore is the author of the JaxPsychoGeo blog. If you've never visited it, set aside a few hours because you will be entranced and loving chasing some of that history. So, Tim, thanks so much for being on again.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Coming up next, get your king cakes ready. It's time for Historic Springfield's 3rd annual Sparty Gras.
Maneuver for control of their father's media empire when he passes away. It's not HBO's Succession, but the real-life family drama surrounding Rupert Murdoch and Fox News. We'll speak with the Atlantic staff writer McKay Coppins. Join us
today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
The House Republicans' budget plan calls for billions of dollars worth of cuts to Medicaid, which provides health coverage for some 72 million Americans.
If you eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse in Medicaid, you've got a huge amount of money that you can spend on real priorities for the country.
I'm Deborah Becker. What's next for Medicaid? That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
After 3 years, Russia's Vladimir Putin has never been closer to winning his war on Ukraine. Ukraine's president has now offered to step down, but that's conditional. And it comes after heavy pressure from President Trump, who says the war is, quote, ridiculous. Why is the U.S. enabling Russia in its efforts to get its way? That's next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, Springfield is bringing Mardi Gras to town with its own twist. Sparty Gras. It's so named for SPAR, which is the Springfield Preservation and Revitalization Council. And joining me to discuss it is the group's executive director, Michael Haskins. Welcome back, Michael.
Hi, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We're also joined by Annie Davis, who is the owner of Pie Daddy, a food truck, as one of the event's vendors. Hi, Annie.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too. So, Michael, how did the idea for Sparty Gras come about in the first place? And how similar is it to like what we think of as a Mardi Gras celebration?
Our previous executive director had the idea, so she gets all the credit. Her name is Kelly Rich, and she's from New Orleans. And she noticed that there could be more Mardi Gras spirit in Jacksonville, and she decided to do something about it and came up with Sparty Gras, which we thought was a fun name for the event. And we really do try to model it. And every year we try to make it more and more similar to what they're doing in New Orleans and an authentic Mardi Gras. So it's got a musical component, but we also encourage people to do golf cart float parade, right? Decorate your golf carts, since it's a little Florida twist. We bring out carnival performers, acrobats, magicians, and make it a carnival-like celebration of Mardi Gras here in Springfield.
And it's even got like a second line, right? Some sort of parade, or is that part of the golf cart parade?
There is a second line. It will be, again, the Florida vibe. There will be the Jacksonville Jaguars D line leading a second line up through Springfield to some of the businesses in Main Street for kind of an after party at the end of the event.
Yeah. So, Annie, food is a huge part of New Orleans culture. Obviously, what is it that you're going to be preparing for Sparty Gras?
Well, I am originally from Trinidad, so I'll be bringing some of my Trinidadian dishes. In Trinidad right now, we also have Carnival, so it is coinciding with everything. We have our Dimanche Gras, we have soca, calypso competitions, and street parades going on basically from tomorrow straight on until next week, Tuesday. So I will be making our fried pie, which is a traditional, sort of like an empanada, but it's fluffy on the inside, crunchy on the outside. And I'll have strawberry pie, which is coming back after about a 6-year hiatus. And then we'll have our pineapple chicken, we'll have our chickpea and potato curry, we'll have island steak, and I'm even bringing out our mango habanero pompano.
Wow, what is that? What's a pompano?
Pompano is a small white fish.
Sure. Yeah.
And we deep fry it in a really nice sauce, and it's served with either fries or seasoned rice, with curry or the pineapple chicken. So it's really good.
I will say the Pie Daddy menu just looks amazing. And it does have, as you say, like the chickpea curry. It's got some vegetarian offerings.
Yes, we have a lot of vegan options.
Yeah. So, Michael, who all participates in this? I mean, is it the merchants of Springfield? Is it mostly Springfield residents that come to it?
We try to encourage local businesses to participate. That's one of the reasons we love working with Annie. And we hope that it's a great support for local and small businesses. Anyone and everyone is welcome. The goal is to showcase our neighborhood to the city. So we want people from outside of Springfield to come. But Springfielders obviously love it, and they decorate their homes, and they participate in the event as well. It's a free event open to the entire community.
And it's at Sesquicentennial Park.
You got it.
I wasn't quite sure I was going to make it through that. But for people who aren't familiar, where is that? And sort of what is the footprint then of the parade and all of that?
So the event is at that park, which is a pocket park SPAR kind of turned into. It was a vacant lot that SPAR turned into a pocket park, which was a kind of a cool amenity. And then that's directly on Main Street. And so it's kind of on the southern end of Main Street. So then we'll have the second line going up Main Street and through the neighborhood. So you get to see some of the decorated homes, and then ending at the local businesses at 8th and Main.
Okay. And is there sort of an after party there, or is it just basically wrap up? It starts, I think, later in the day, right?
It does. It starts at 4 p.m. on March 1st, and then around 8 p.m., the businesses, there's a few breweries and restaurants, they're going to be having their own kind of after parties, including Tallulah Bistro, Stumpy's Hatchet House, and so we hope that people will get to enjoy some of those after parties.
And so, what are you going to be doing besides cooking, Annie? Are you going to be celebrating? Are you going to be participating? Or are you basically going to be stuck in the kitchen for the event?
Well, last time my kids came, so I was able to get out and walk around a little bit. So I'm hoping to do the same thing. It's really amazing. My kids had their wagon decorated, and they decorated everything, and they were walking with the D line as well last year and playing drums. Actually, I think my son got one of the drumsticks from one of the guys at the D line, so it was pretty cool. So
Fantastic.
yeah.
So it's this, no, next Saturday?
This Saturday, March 1st
March
at 4 p.m.
All right. And that's at 1527 North Main.
Yes.
Okay.
5th and Main, if it's helpful for people.
All right. Michael Haskins and Annie Davis, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Hope you
Thanks
have a
so
great
much.
event. Nice
Thank
to meet
you.
you. Yeah.
Nice to meet you too.
And that's our program. Thank you for listening. If you have feedback or suggestions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight, or you can find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform or at WJCT.org. The executive producer of First Coast Connect is David Luckin. Our producer is Stacy Bennett. Our show's director.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Amelia Island presents Concours Week, March 5th through 9th, featuring rare and vintage autos, vehicle auctions, road tours, and more, culminating in the 30th annual celebration, the Amelia Concours d'Elegance. Details at ameliaisland.com/Concours Week.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
The president says Vladimir Putin wants peace.